Hi, I'm Derek and welcome back to Fun Scale Models. This series focusing on building the Park Flyer P-40C Tomahawk. In this episode, we'll be continuing covering the model's fuselage. Before covering the fuselage, there's a couple of small items that still need to be done. The first was I blocked in here with a small hole drilled through. That is to be able to get to the set screws for the motor and the motor mount. So there's one on this side and there's one on this side. Because they're not exactly straight through at a slight angle, that's why the different panels are filled in. The other thing we need to do is to prep the under chin or the nose section here. So what I've done is I've added these parts right here, UC on the part list. They are basically guides for the section of covering. It's actually cardstock that goes in this area right here. There's also a pre-cut part called F2B. That goes right in this section here. It's a bit delicate, so be careful with it. That needs to be attached and then blended into the fuselage before covering starts. I've also added a little bit of light gray in this area just in case some of the tissue doesn't cover it all up. An additional feature that I added, I just drew and cut a circle and put some lines in it. The P40 had 3 radiators, one in the center and 2 on either side. That's why the P40 had its unique chin shape. And the only one you're going to be able to see is just this one. I want to make sure I leave these areas open for air cooling. So with a little bit of sanding, this is now blended with the rest of the fuselage. So the first section of the fuselage is the tail under the horizontal section. I've already applied it here to the model. So it wraps around the bottom and it wraps around the rear section. I also just trimmed it so it was about down the center line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shrink and seal this now. The reason being is in this section right here, that's where the push rod exits. I'm only going to create just a slight cut in there before I slide in the push rod. And then I'm also going to leave the push rod installed while we cover the rest of the model. One additional little trick that I like to do is any sort of the larger sections that I've trimmed off, I save those as I may need to use a small little bit to maybe, fill a patch that I need, or maybe I just need to extend the covering a little bit further. We have the tail section here shrunk and sealed. Might be a little bit difficult to see here, but we've got a bit of an issue or an error. This is a water spot that was a result of my misting the tissue to shrink it up. That mostly happened for 2 reasons. One, when I was spraying, I wasn't spraying far enough away, and so a larger droplet of water hit this. Also, it indicates that I didn't have the tissue sealed well enough. So what I've done is, on other parts, I've gone ahead and resprayed them with an additional dusting coat to help seal the ink. We have the push rod exit right about here. What I'm going to do is I'm only going to cut a small spot right now. If I need to go bigger, I can later. The other thing that I've done is I've got the end of the push rod here, where the 90-degree that gets into the horn, just covered with some tape and some round edges so it doesn't poke a hole. Just sort of looking for that spot. And remember, we're crossing over, so we need to make sure we put it into the opposite side. There, we'll snug that all up. We can go ahead and cover the opposite side next. All right, so we've got the other rear section added, and I've also fed through the control rod. I added just a piece of string in here just to kind of help keep it from flexing and bending. Not that there's a lot of load on this particular airplane when it's flying at speed. I've also painted interior green this area here. There are some placards that go in there, but you do still see some of this interior. So I figured it'd be better than safe than sorry than just to go ahead and paint the whole area. Next, I'll be adding this section here. So here we have the rear section. If you look closely, it might be a bit difficult to see this panel line, and then there's a mark right there, and same thing on that side. That is used to line up with this stringer. So it'll go just like that. We'll go ahead and apply it, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, and here is the panel added. See, it lines up pretty good. One thing I did notice, I'm not sure if it was with how I printed it or maybe just a slight error in the actual template itself, but the notches lines didn't match up. So what I basically did is just, matched up the color break lines, make sure that I had sufficient coverage on the top and on the bottom, and it applied just fine. Do the other side next. And here we have the other side. Came out pretty well. The next we'll be working on this section right here. So we're ready to add the section right in here. I've already pre-cut it out. One thing to notice is that this section up here is actually a flap that will be glued onto this section. We've also painted some interior green as well in this forward cockpit section. So we have the overall area covered. You can see here that this is where the overlap comes onto the top of the rail. And I've also used some additional easy dope along the top of this to help set it in, as well along the edge where the wing saddle meets the tissue here. This will be, once it's dried, trimmed out, and we can then move on to the other side. We have the other side covered and completed. We'll keep moving forward on the nose sections. Also wanted to show the hatch. So some additional items added here that'll help blend it in with the canopy and the rest of the frame. We'll go ahead and add the covering for the hatch shortly. So I've added this bottom chin section here. Next, I'll be adding this upper section, which will go right into that. And here is the attached piece. So here's the hatch covered, pretty straightforward. You just want to take time in getting the alignment of the nose art here, along with how it matches up with the fuselage. Nothing too fancy. It wraps around both the bottom of the hatch rails as well as the front. With only one panel left to do in the nose, there's a couple things you want to start thinking about before covering that. The first would be that if you have any set screws that you may have taken out of your motor mount, it's best to add them now before covering this up. While we do have these holes here to put the Allen head through to tighten it, it can be a bit tricky to try and fish them through there. The other thing is this piece here. This is the under chin cardstock. You print this as part of the cardstock sheet. What I've done is I've taken put it against a sharp edge and pre-creased these lines. This part will sit here and rests against the UC parts there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to notch a small section out here so that it slides a little bit further in depth, and then I'll work it to shape before gluing. So with my small notch, I'm going to use basically a marker here to help curve this piece. So just sort of hold it up. You can exaggerate it just a little bit because eventually you're going to form it to the right shape. You can see kind of looks like a classic mustache. That will fit just in like that. So once this is glued in place, I'll go ahead and I'll trim this to be flush with the balsa parts. So it's a little bit difficult to see here, but I've been gradually trimming and shaving this to match this stringer here. I'll do the same on this side. So here's the finished item. You can see it's got the little dish right on each side there, and it's glued flush so it's even with these stringers. The next thing we'll do is we'll cover these sections, and then there is one final section that goes over the intake area. And we've got the final piece added here on the nose section. And so the chin area has been covered. Takes a little bit of time. You do have to do some trimming to make it fit your model. Just keep patient and keep working with it. You can see the center section here has not yet been cut out. I'm going to let this dry thoroughly before I carefully cut that out with an X-Acto. The next step then would to let the model fully dry. The glue can take 20 to 30 minutes. So give yourself an hour and grab a cup of coffee, and then it'll be ready to start shrinking.